Hello, I'm Dr. David Santos. We are continuing our study in myths and religions. We're in the medieval period, looking at medieval myths and religions, and we've previously looked at a very broad spectrum survey of all medieval. I can't say it all, but some of the main, most well-known religions from the medieval period. From there, we also looked at some of the creation accounts. From here in this video, we're going to look at some of the myths related to giants, divine rebellion, and the fall. It's a topic that's come up a number of times already. So now we're just bringing it into the medieval period. Moving forward, we're going to be taking pretty deep dives into specifically some of the religious practices and rites and rituals and beliefs from around the globe, but especially European religion within the medieval period. We're going to be looking at some of the Christianized folklore that comes into, say, the Celtic religion. We've taken a peek at that. We're going to look at some of the interrelationship with Christianity and how many of these traditions start to become Christianized and maintain their folklore, maintain their traditions, but change them. That especially happens middle of Crusade period. So for today, let's begin just by looking at some main questions here to consider. So our questions on the board at this moment are: how do mythologies explain rebellion against divine authority? What spiritual lessons are hidden in these stories? And that idea of rebellion against divine authority is one that comes up in all of myth, whatever culture we look at, whatever time period we look at. It comes up over and over again, I think reflecting the reality of original sin, and original sin being rebellion against the true divine authority, the creator, creator of the universe, creator of the planet, creator of and giver of life. So in the previous lectures, we examined how many ancient religions begin with myth of creation in this primordial chaos, and then is subdued by some kind of divine being. These creation narratives often involve the ordering of a disordered cosmos. So from chaos to order is generally the idea that they're going with. Within that, moving from chaos to disorder, we see chaos personified in a lot of different ways through figures. So we're making them look like things like monsters or serpents or giants. Such beings frequently stand in opposition to the divine order. They represent the wild or the untamed forces that threaten civilization and structure. In today's lecture, we're going to shift our focus from the establishment of cosmic order to the disruption of that order through spiritual rebellion, particularly through the appearance of giants and monstrous beings. Our exploration will consider how various mythological traditions present giants not merely as creatures of great size, but as symbols of rebellion, pride, and the consequence of crossing divine boundaries. Specifically, we're going to look at the role of Jotnar in Norse mythology and Gogmagog in British legends, trolls and mountain giants in Germanic folklore, and Nephilim in the biblical tradition. These stories, while culturally distinct, often share a concern with the fragility of divine order in the face of spiritual defiance. The guiding question for the session is: how do mythologies across culture explain rebellion against the divine order? As we work through these traditions, we're going to reflect on whether these stories function merely as symbolic myths or whether they preserve echoes of real theological truth about pride, fallenness, and divine judgment. All right, so the first thing we're going to begin with is Norse mythology, Jotnar, and the rebellious order. In Norse cosmology, the cosmos begins not with peace, but with tension between opposing forces, fire and ice, creation and chaos. From the melting of ice in the primordial void emerges Ymir, the first of the Jotnar, or giants. According to the myth in the Prose Edda, from Ymir's flesh the earth was created, and from his blood the sea, mountains from his bones, trees from his hair, and from his skull the sky. Ymir represents the primal chaotic force, immense, generative, and destructive. He gives rise to other giants from his armpits and legs, producing a race that threatens to overwhelm the state of order. In response, Odin and his brothers, Vili and Ve, slay Ymir. His death enables the creation of the world, but his kin survive, and they're banished to a realm beyond the boundaries of the divine order. Another source of tension in Norse mythology is Loki, the trickster, who straddles the line between gods and the giants. Himself born of Jotnar, Loki fathers 3 monstrous offsprings with one of the giantesses, and one is a wolf, one is a serpent, and one is the ruler of the dead. These beings are not simply threats; they are cosmic. They have a cosmic destiny. Within their myth, we find out that they will play a pivotal role in the end times for them, which is Ragnarok, the end of the current world order. Then comes, this is a quote, then comes the mighty serpent swimming up from the dark depths of the ocean. The wolf breaks loose. Much do I know, and more can see, of the fate of the gods, the mighty in battle. We in there. That's from Voluspa 56-58. The gods attempt to restrain this chaos. Fenrir is bound by a magical fetter, and the Jormungandr is cast into the sea, and Hel, these are the 3 children of Loki. Hel is confined to the underworld, but the mythical tension remains unresolved with this ultimate destiny in mind. So these stories reflect this deeply dualistic religious worldview. Norse cosmology centers around the world tree, which connects the 9 realms. These include Asgard, Midgard, and the home of the giants, among others. The Aesir represents divine order, governance, and warfare, while the Jotnar symbolize wilderness, nature, and the force of chaos. Alongside the Aesir are the Vanir, fertility gods, which often associated with prosperity, magic, sorcery, peace. After a cosmic war, the Vanir are reconciled with the Aesir, suggesting a synthesis of divine functions. Religious rituals and worship in Norse society reinforce these cosmological ideas. One of the most important rite was the blot, a sacrificial feast held at sacred groves or temples, such as the Great Temple at Uppsala, as described by Adam of Bremen. Animals, and sometimes humans, were sacrificed to honor the gods and to ensure favor. We see within Norse magic is often practiced by women or the god Odin himself. This involved divination, trances, or being in a trance state, and manipulation of fate. Fate is always a big one, because your fate is something that's beyond your control, and it's describes what your world's going to be like. From there, we get the practice reveals a worldview which destiny can actually be influenced through spiritual engagement with the unseen. Theologically, the giants represent the wild, untamed forces of the cosmos, both necessary and dangerous. They predate the gods, shape the world, and eventually challenge the very order that they helped form. Unlike the Christian concept of evil as a moral category, Norse mythology presents chaos as this existential reality, always pressing against the borders of divine structure. As such, the Jotnar are not merely villains, they are the eternal other, the storm at the edge of the world, ever opposing the light of the gods. We take a little bit different view here when we look at British medieval legends. Gogmagog and the ancient enemies is one that's there. One of the most enduring giant myths from the medieval British tradition is the story of Gogmagog. Sounds familiar if you're a Bible student, of course, as recorded in the account of Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum, Britain. According to Geoffrey, Gogmagog was the last survivor of a race of giants who inhabited the island of Albion before the arrival of Brutus of Troy, the legendary founder of Britain. Upon landing on the island, Brutus and his followers encountered these monstrous inhabitants. Gogmagog, described as a giant of enormous strength and savagery, is captured and brought before Cornelius, who's a champion of Brutus. In a dramatic contest of strength, Cornelius wrestles the giant and throws him off a cliff. That's not nice. And ending the reign of the ancient giants and symbolizing the triumph of civilized order over this barbaric chaos. Beneath this legend lies a complex layer of pre-Christian British and Celtic religious beliefs. The spiritual landscape of ancient Britain was deeply animistic. Natural features such as mountains, rivers, trees, and groves were believed to be inhabited by divine beings or ancestral spirits. Giants in this context were not merely mythical antagonists, but may have represented either ancient primordial forces or fallen divine beings, or even the memories of prehistoric people encountered and mythologized by later societies, or a blending of all the above. In this sense, the giants served as spiritual placeholders for chaotic, wild past. So as people come along and write stories, they often write stories about the place where they live, and they bring in these cultural memories and mythologize them is the idea here. The Celtic practices of offering items into water, such as swords, shields, and even human remains, was likely intended to honor or appease the spirits associated with these Sacred spaces, bogs, rivers, and lakes were not just places of natural wonder, but of spiritual danger and divine presence. Religious leadership was often mediated through the Druids, who acted not only as priests, but also judges, poets, historians, and seers. Julius Caesar, writing in the Gallic War, observed that Druids oversaw religious rites and maintain a tradition of oral teaching, emphasizing their central role in spiritual life and cultural continuity. And by the way, if everything is oral tradition and you don't have a foundation, that they can certainly manipulate those in order to fit modern cultural requirements. The myth of this giant in Cornelius also served as an important cultural and political function in the medieval imagination. Geoffrey of Monmouth's narrative was not merely mythical, but carried an ideological message. The civilizing mission of Brutus and his Trojans is framed as a divinely sanctioned conquest of the barbaric giants. This theme aligns closely with the broader medieval Christian idea of ordo contra chaos, the belief that God ordained civilization must replace lawlessness. Now, remember, we're moving into medieval period. We're moving to the Dark Ages, where scripture's locked away essentially, and much of Christendom becomes a non-biblical representation, with certainly people being saved. However, actions and practice didn't always align with what we would believe today and should have believed then. So from there, paganism, so bringing in an ordered civilization that replaces this lawlessness, but they're also looking to replace paganism and demonic or monstrous presences and practice that would unite the two things. So these pagans believed in demonic forces and at times sought to unite with them and utilize that power that they believed was there. They believed in sort of naturalistic, we call them monsters, but beings, creatures out there that maybe are not seen today. But whether they're or not, I'll let you decide how you prefer. But they believed it. Since we're doing history, that's as far as we need to consider it. Giants, in this particular story, the giant functions as more than just this mythical antagonist. He becomes a theological symbol of the pagan past, one that must literally and spiritually be cast down to usher in the rule of divine order and Christian dominance or kingship, as they're looking at the church being the kingdom. So obviously not a dispensational idea. We believe that the kingdom is the kingdom and the church is the church age, and this is what happens when you cross the two things together. In Germanic folklore, we see combinations of a lot of the other cultures as well. So if you take the Celtic and the British, you're gonna see overlap with these. In this case, we're going to look at mountain giants and trolls. Now, they saw these not just simply as demonic forces, but also as naturalistic beings. A prominent tale within the Germanic and Norse mythology that illustrates the theme of divine deception and giantly rebellion is the story of the giant builder, which is preserved in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. So if you've not heard of Snorri Sturluson, he's one that records a lot of these stories. and myths and traditions. In this account, a mysterious builder arrives at Asgard, offering to construct an impregnable wall to protect the gods from their enemies. The builder demands a high price: the sun, the moon, and the hand of the goddess Freya in marriage. I don't think anyone asked Freya, but the gods agree, on the condition that the work must be completed within a single winter. When it becomes apparent that the builder, aided by his powerful stallion, might actually succeed, the gods grow anxious and command Loki to sabotage the effort. Loki transforms into a mare, lures away the horse, and delays the builder's progress. Upon discovering that the builder is in fact a giant, or a Jotnar, in disguise, the gods call upon Thor, who promptly crushes the giant's skull. And this tale is not only highlights the cunning and violence often necessary to maintain divine order, but also reinforces the theme of giants as deceivers and threats to the stability of the cosmos or great order. Germanic cosmology, like its Norse counterpart, places strong emphasis on fate, conflict, and cycles of renewal and destruction. Giants and trolls are often portrayed as primordial beings older than the gods themselves. I find that interesting, and we'll do more analysis on the future. It's sometimes viewed as cursed or fallen, or inherently hostile to the divine order. Though not always morally evil, they are alien to the structure imposed by the gods, and they therefore must be reinstated. They need to be restrained. They need to be deceived, or even sometimes destroyed. These beings frequently dwell in isolated, perilous environments. They hang out in places like mountains, caves, or rocky outcroppings. Places really often regarded as less habitable by people. Germanic spirituality was deeply rooted in the natural world and ancestral reverence. Supernatural beings like the land spirits and the female ancestral spirits were often believed to inhabit the landscape and influence human affairs. People made household offerings to these entities, placing food or drink outside to win their favor or protection, especially during seasonal transition or important life events. Burial mounds were also venerated as sacred spaces. These mounds were often believed to house the spirits of the dead, including both revered ancestors and restless or dangerous beings. However, sometimes even giants, and whose the main section there, whose presence had to be ritually acknowledged or appeased. A defining feature of Germanic belief was the concept of marginality, the danger and the spiritual potency of boundaries. Trolls and giants appear in stories at thresholds, the edge of civilization, at the mountain pass, at dark forests, river crossings, or twilight hours. These were seen as times and places where the veil between the worlds got thinner, requiring caution, ritual awareness, so that they require divine protection, especially in these thin places. Folklore from across Scandinavian Germany warn of travelers encountering such beings during dusk, during storms, or specifically sacred nights. this reinforces the idea that contact with chaos was always a present possibility and fear. So to sum this all up, the giants and the trolls of Germanic folklore symbolize a deep, ingrained religious understanding of the persistent threat of disorder. The reverence for place and ancestry and the need for ritual boundaries were there to protect the community, and they're not merely figures of fear, but embodiments of this religious worldview in which divine order is always fragile. And they require this vigilance and use of their own ritual rites, practices, and talismans in order to protect themselves and maintain society. And for those who look at the Genesis 6 Nephilim passage, as many Christians do, not all understand that, but as many do, and the standard first century Second Temple period understanding of this was actually the angel view of Genesis 6. Nephilim are offspring from fallen angels, a union between fallen angels and women. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that because there are other better videos about that we've already produced. But that union is one of breaking God's order specifically. So we want to keep that in mind. In this passage, we see Genesis 6:4, for example. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men, I believe that's Gibborim, who were of old, men of renown. Actually, mighty men might be, take that back. Mighty men is Nephilim, and men of renown. I believe that one's Gibborim. So these words get used later in other places as well. But in this passage, we see the sons of God. If we use the Job's definition of sons of God in a few other places, we see angels. And now, these are not the angels of heaven because they've departed heaven. So these are the fallen angels. So we just need to understand it that way. If you take another view of that, we certainly know that regardless of how we take Genesis 6, there are giants in the land, particularly the land of Canaan, both before the flood and after the flood. And anyways, they're there and present. So we have this further elaboration on this episode is found in the book of Enoch, which is a Second Temple Jewish text that, while not part of the biblical canon, is one of these influential Second Temple almost historical literature. It's not canon. It's not scripture. So for those that want to argue, it was left out of the Bible. Yes, it was on purpose. And it's not a secret. It's not like, we're hiding this from you. No, it's just not. It didn't meet the threshold of Scripture, and they tested books. They're not trying to maintain one particular narrative. No, they're trying to maintain truth. Anyone who denies that, just stupid. Sorry, I'm just a ridiculous idea that I just despise. But and yet here I am wanting to talk about the book of Enoch, even though I'm like, no, there's this set of books that are canon. This isn't it, but it's still important for our understanding, especially of what people believed historically in the first century, and those things that they believed in the first century trickle down through all these different societies. So we see the same ideas pop up when we're in the classical period, certainly, because that Second Temple period is within the classical period. Then, so we see ancient, classical, and now we should certainly expect these same ideas to pop up throughout these mythic traditions in globally. If it was something that actually happened, well, there you go. So these things are maybe a part of our cultural memory that was passed down pre-flood. Then you see how still have giants post-flood. Then, in this case, there's a group in the book of Enoch, a group of 200 angels called the Watchers. They descend to Mount Hermon and take human wives. Their union produces these monstrous offspring, giants who consume the resources of the earth and turn against humanity. They do all kinds of weird stuff. These giants introduce forbidden knowledge to mankind, including sorcery, astrology, and warfare, farming, medicine. This accelerates human depravity as they get better at these things. As judgment, God sends the archangels to bind the rebellious watchers in the abyss and destroy their children with the coming of the flood. Though not scripture, this narrative reflects an expanded theological interpretation of Genesis 6, emphasizing the cosmic scope of sin and rebellion. Like I said, not all Christians believe this interpretation. I'm okay with that. It's hard to handle some of these other passages, though, that relate to it. Theologically, these texts introduce a profound dimension of the biblical understanding of the fall. It's not only a human story rooted in Adam and Eve's disobedience, but also a cosmic rebellion involving heavenly beings transgressing their appointed roles. The theme of divine boundaries is central. The sons of God violate the created order, leading to a world filled with violence, corruption, and unnatural creatures. This interpretation finds support in various New Testament writings such as Jude 1, 6, and 7, which refers to the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, linking their sin to this sexual immorality of Sodom. Oh, but the angels of heaven are not given in marriage. Don't marry or not given in marriage. How? Wait, yes, that's talking about the angels of heaven. Of course they don't. And secondly, all angels appear in male human. Not all. Most of the time we see angels represented, see in the Old Testament, they are in the form of human men. So I don't know what their technology is there, but it seems like they can morph. It talks about Satan himself can appear or morph into an angel of light. Well, what else can he morph into? I don't know. Obviously, I take the angel theory. I can also find common ground with those who don't. I'm okay with that. So, but 2 Peter 2:4 affirms, for if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. And then it goes on to say the judgment of false teachers is scary. These references strongly suggest a shared theological tradition among these passages. Judgment, rebellion, spiritual beings. Anyways, I said I was not going to spend a long time on this. I already spent way more time than I meant. So with that, what we're really just trying to get to is that we see these traditions run through all of these different cultures. We're probably not done with medieval giants yet, just because they show up so many other places within the folklore that we're gonna hit them, but it's gonna have different themes attached to it. So we're gonna look at the myths as we touch on different themes. But to sum up this piece, The biblical material, both canonically and extra biblically, portrays the giants of Genesis not as mythological curiosities, but as manifestations of spiritual pride, rebellion, and the breakdown of created boundaries. This tradition differs from pagan myths in that it does not glorify the giants, nor does it see the cycle of chaos and order as inevitable. Instead, Scripture reveals a sovereign God who judges rebellion, restores order, and ultimately triumphs over all of the cosmic threat. So as we survey the mythological traditions of Norse, British, Celtic, Germanic, and biblical sources, a number of shared themes emerge, highlighting a cross-cultural recognition of cosmic order, spiritual boundaries, and divine judgment, despite vast differences in context and theology. Each tradition portrays giants or monstrous beings as symbolic, representing disorder, or those things that stand against God. And we've been through them, but here's a chart you can take a look at that may help you. It's in the notes as well. Taken together, these traditions reinforce a shared human intuition of rebellion against the divine order leads to chaos, and that rebellion, whether framed mythologically or theologically, demands both judgment and then that judgment followed by restoration. While pagan myths often resign themselves to cyclical destruction and renewal, the biblical narrative uniquely offers redemption and final victory in Jesus Christ, not through the return of order by heroic violence, but through the sovereign hand of a just and merciful God who sent his Son that we could be redeemed and that our rebelliousness could finally be brought to an end.